pond liner in. I have to say this is probably the most awkward shape I've ever had to line. Typically it's my own pond. Thankfully, because the entire pond is going to be encased in stone walling all around the edges and gravel on the base, none of this pond liner is going to be on show. So where normally I have to be quite careful about making sure the liner is as neat as possible and sort of minimal creases, which in this kind of shape is very difficult, I don't need to worry too much about this because the whole lot's going to be concealed. And actually, from a kind of a longevity perspective, to protect the pond liner, it's much better if we can have the pond liner loose and not too taut, because it's that tension which potentially could puncture with a sharp object behind it. So by keeping it loose like this with a few creases, that's going to help to prevent that. So I'm going to start to get some water in here, neaten it up a little bit, fill it right up, and then I can trim it a cursory kind of first trim just to get rid of the bulk of the excess. Then we're going to move on. So, I'm going to give a bit of a trim to the pond liner now because there's masses of excess. Unfortunately, this kind of shape is very, very wasteful on pond liner. I essentially had to measure up as if it was a full half a circle. And then all of this section here, of course, is going to be wasted. But all the remaining pond liner I'm going to cut up into various sections and use that as the kind of offcuts to cushion underneath the stonework. And of course, all of this is going to be encased in stone, so there's going to be a lot of offcuts and a lot of secondary liner required to do that job. Yeah, looks like a pond now. I'm pleased with that. It's nice and stable. One foot. Don't get your hands out your pockets. If I remove them, could you jump across? Mind your shoelaces. So we have a pond and a bridge. I might remove the bridge. I think that's just going to encourage my younger children to muck about on there. So the next stage, I'll let it settle for a little while and then it needs to be drained out. Normally I would only partially drain it, just lower than the shelf. I normally incorporate a sort of a stone building shelf around the peripheral of the pond. So I'll drain down to that level and just start to build. But in this instance, of course, I'm going to have to drain it out fully because the stonework is starting from the base of the pond. So I want to make sure that before I do drain it out, that the pond liner is held in place. I've got lots of stones and weights and various things all around the outside that will help to stop it from moving. And then when I get time, I can start to do the next stage. It's lovely though, just seeing that excavation filled with water and seeing the surface of the water in the garden. Don't you reckon? No, I'm pleased with that. Don't think. Tea, please. Will you record it? It's about to. I don't think my garden has ever looked so messy. Look at it. What a state. All my materials are here. I've just picked up a ton of builder's sand. So I've got my builder's sand, my sharp sand, some cement. Just setting up my mixer this morning. You could probably hear in my voice, I still haven't got rid of my man flu. Still negative for COVID though. So this morning I'm going to start the actual construction of my pond. So I'm going to drain down the pond back down to base level. Now thankfully, because of that, it's got a central support which is going to be there as the support for the stepping stones. There's going to be some water retained in this section, which is great. So that's going to help to keep that liner sort of, you know, positioned and not move. Before I start to drain the pond here, I just want to put a few more stones underwater just to hold the liner in place, so that as the water is drained out and the weight is removed from the liner doesn't move too much. Before I do any of that though, it's a cup of tea time and some breakfast. Breakfast. Leftover curry in the morning, and a homemade curry at that. It's healthy. And down she goes. Now I'm hanging on to all this water. Conveniently, I've still got the kids' paddling pool up, so it's going into there, because there's going to be a lot of toing and froing on this job, and it's good to try and save as much water as possible. So that's going down pretty quickly. Right, I've got my cement here. This is just a standard mix, 4:1, 2 parts sharp, 2 parts soft to 1 cement, and a little bit of plasticizer just to make it nice and kind of silky. I've got my various pieces of secondary pond liner cut off already, which are going to provide a little bit of cushioning to the main liner beneath when the stonework goes on top. I've got my little fairy microphone working again, so thank you GoPro. Sound quality should be back to normal. So I'm ready to make a start. And this makes a change, that I'm not actually working and wading around in water. Obviously, usually when I'm doing rock work kind of on a shelf that's up here somewhere, I've still got a certain amount of water left in the pond, and I'm normally then floundering around in my waders doing the stonework. So this is a bit of a luxury being dry. Now I'm going to start off my first course of stone using some slightly broader pieces, and then sort of stagger it up so that again the base of the wall here structurally is a little bit more supported. Obviously I've got a foundation beneath the pond liner here, a concrete footing, which is going to help, but just as an additional bit of support, I'll start off the first base stones as a little bit wider, and then I'll step in for the next section of walling as it works its way up. This feels very bizarre, doing this in my own garden for a change. Just keep all my tools to hand. So I've got my various little pointing trowels, my old favourite gauging trowel which I've had for years, a couple of different sizes of levels. I think it's going to be too small a pond really for me to be using my big 6-foot level until I've got the stonework built right up to top level, so I'll be using my smaller 2-foot and my little scaffolding level for the bulk of this. You can see now that this section of the pond is empty, how many creases there are in the pond liner, where normally if I'm laying a liner I'd like to be as careful as possible to try and get the liner as neat as possible. This is a very difficult shape, but I'd still be able to do a much better job than all these creases. But of course the whole lot's going to be concealed, so I'm really not fussed about that. And actually having a little bit more flex in the liner is just going to provide a bit of additional security in the future, that if the ground were to give way underneath it and there was a bit of subsidence, there's not going to be too much weight and sort of load bearing on an already taut pond liner. Now I mustn't get too carried away and get too much stone down, because of course I've got to make sure I leave areas free or incorporate conduits for cables, pipework, inlet and outlet. Now in this of course I'm going to have one cascade over here and one cascade over here, with one pump delivering water to those two falls, and then I'm going to have a second pump which is going to be delivering water to the filtration system. So I'll have one pump at either end with an 1.5 inch heavy duty pipe incorporated through the stonework. So I mustn't forget that. Right, well you don't need to see me doing all this. I'm going to stick it onto a bit of time lapse, put some music on and crack on with the build. Oh, hello. Another morning, another breakfast. Chili con carne on the menu this morning. Most important meal of the day, breakfast. Yummy. So today is day 2 on my stonework building. Really pleased with the progress of my initial day. Considering I'm doing all the mixing, the loading, the splitting independently. You can't see, but I've also done some of the inside face here. So today I want to crack on and get this section of the pond finished if I can. And then I can move over to transferring this water into this side and start to build stonework on this portion of the pond. But it's really nice now already to start to see the insides of the pond taking shape. I mean, some would say it's a lot of effort and it's a shame to have something like this which is concealed underwater, but of course the pond's going to be clear, and to be able to see that lovely rock face, that stonework underwater, really adds to the pond and the feature as a whole. And of course it means that as the water starts to evaporate, or if the water levels drop slightly, we're not revealing unsightly black liner, we're just revealing more of the lovely stonework. Got another nice day with the weather. I've been quite lucky at the moment. It's definitely getting cold. Autumn is certainly well on its way. It got down to 3.5 degrees last night, so it was a pretty chilly morning. I'm not yet at a position where I need to cover my rock and cement, but it is something that I need to be wary of for the next few weeks if we've got any risks of frosts. Let's crack on and hope I get another productive day today. What am I eating for breakfast in the morning? Well, today I have a lovely slice of sourdough bread, 2 fried eggs, a nice piece of thick bacon, some mushrooms, tomatoes and a bit of rocket. So I've gone traditionalist today. So the rock work in the pond is taking shape. It was another day yesterday of a bit of productivity and starting the outer face of wall here. This is a real challenge actually, and it's very difficult to try to maintain that perfectly circular edge of stonework. There's not really any sort of reference points. My nice neat excavation of course has been concealed by the liner, and the creases and folds in that are sort of hiding that nice neat edge. I'm starting stonework at the base of the pond further in and working my way out, and I have to ensure that by the time I get to the ground surface where the edging will be or the coping stones will be, that is as close to a perfect circle as possible. And it's difficult. It was a lot easier on the inside piece because it's a tighter curve, and I've got a sort of a greater reference point with that kind of very obvious circle in front of me. But along here with just borders and plants and bits and pieces, it's not quite so obvious, but I'm pleased with how it's taking shape. Started to build in some of the conduits and pipe work, so we've got an inlet here. This will be an inlet to one of the cascades, and the pump will be sitting down here. Now normally I'd like to make sure that there's enough pipe work that I can lift the pump cleanly out of the pond for servicing. But in this feature, I want to try and keep everything as minimal as possible, and want to disguise as much as possible any kind of equipment and you know, man-made paraphernalia. So I'm keeping the pipe work really short. I might even cut this shorter still, so that the pump itself will sit very neatly in the corner, and I'll conceal that with a few stones and bits and pieces. And when it comes to maintenance, I shall be getting in the pond and just uncoupling the hose tail attached to the pump so that I can lift the pump out. It does make maintenance a little bit more laborious. It's not often I'll have to take the pump out, and actually encasing it in stonework is going to help to protect it and shield it from any leaves and debris and other bits and pieces that might block it up. So there should be less cleaning involved in the first place. The second pipe here you can just see concealed, that's going to be a conduit for some cables. Obviously in this section we're going to have one pump for both of the water blades, and then in the other section over here there will be the secondary pump which is for the life support, the filtration. And again on that side I'll have an inlet and a conduit. The lighting, 3 lights, one up lighting the water blade this side, one up lighting the water blade that side. The lights I'm using, the transformer has the option of being submersed in the pond, and then you can run and connect both lights up to it. But I think I don't want to do that. I shall keep the transformer external up at the back behind the walling, and then I can route one light all the way around to the transformer here, and another light all the way around to the transformer, and then have a central light somewhere again plugged into that transformer. I think that's probably going to be logistically the best way to do it. So again, really for the next few days it's just plugging on and building up my stonework. It's amazing how much rock I actually use doing this. And my rock pile is starting to dwindle. You good boy. Got my little helper today, who's rather fascinated with the birds. And yeah, silly boy. What's that? Go and get it. Wally dog. There's nothing there, Diggs. So just a second to go off camera, a lovely emperor dragonfly flew over. So despite the fact the pond's not finished yet, the wildlife is literally queuing to get in. That's fantastic. Bye. Oh, the kids are gone, I can carry on. So something I'm doing a lot of off camera is just cleaning up the stonework when I finish laying all of the stones and sort of mortar them into place. And this is something called raking up the joints. Essentially where the stone is mortared into position and sitting on its little pad of cement. I don't want too much of this visible, and so to sort of try and create that more natural dry stone wall effect, one would simply rake out using anything really. I'm using one of my little micro pointing trowels and just a little brick tie, and just scrape out the joint like so. A stiff paintbrush is also very useful, and I'll go around and I'll brush away a lot of the excess as well. Now you want to let the mortar go off and sort of semi-harden for an hour or two before you attempt to do this. You don't want it to be too wet and too messy. So this has been down now for about 3 hours, and it's just at the stage where it's a little bit firmer. So I can rake this out without making too much mess and without staining too much of the stone. Now again, I don't have to be too precious about that. All of this stonework currently is below water level. This is probably just a fraction above water level, but everything else here is underwater. So any marks on the stone are really not going to be visible. It's a milestone moment this morning. Actually feels like I'm making progress on this. I'm now swapping to the other half of the pond. So first thing I have to do is to drain away this water, and conveniently I can just drain it into that half of the pond, and it'll be quite nice to see some of that stonework getting submersed. Using my trusty Awaza Pondovac 5 here just to hoover this up. So here we go. As you can probably tell from what I'm wearing, the weather has changed dramatically for the worse. It's a lot colder. It's currently 8 degrees, but in the wind chill it feels half that. And I'm still in summer mode, so I'm really feeling the cold today. Not much progress in the last week. I've been busy doing other pond jobs, a restoration for 3 days, doing a restorative work on a pond edge, pond surround, and then another full pond drain and clean to sort out some leaks. So I've not had any time to work on my own pond. So I've got one day this week where I can make a little bit more progress. Weather has really taken a turn for the worse in the last week. We've had a huge amount of rain. As you can see from the, what have we got in here? About 10 inches of water. So I do officially have a pond. Today, continuing with rock work. I reckon another day, a day and a half or so, and I'll have all the rock work done up to the top of water level. I've got a few intricate areas to work on today, so I'm sort of at the area where I'm thinking about overflow. I'm going to have an overflow on this side of the pond, disappearing off to a handy culvert. Obviously more pipe work and conduits for the second pump for the filtration system, and conduits for various cables for the lighting and the pumps, etc. For the overflow, I'll be using the trusty Awaza Tradux, or Tradux, I can never pronounce this, but it's a really useful union through tank connector, a nice robust unit with a decent flat seal where I can cut a hole through the liner, put this union on, put a hose tail on one side with some decent heavy duty hose going off to drainage, and on the inside of the pond I'll be using an Evolution Aqua rubber elbow or rubber joint. Again, these are fantastic. All of the Evolution Aqua range of easy connectors are fantastic. Really get you out of trouble for a lot of issues you might encounter in pond use, but it works very well sat on the end of this union within the pond, and it allows me to articulate this joint so that I can raise or drop the water level depending on where I want it to sit. Obviously I can have the lowest water level by removing it entirely, but if I put this on and articulate it up to its utmost position, I'll end up with an extra sort of 3 inches or so, 4 inches of water. A little leaf guard will sit in top of this, or in here depending on the flow, just so I can make sure I'm not going to get any debris getting drawn down into the overflow and causing blockages, but this works very well. So I've got a lot more rock to cut today, get the pond drained out and emptied, hope the weather holds out, and carry on building. Well, good afternoon. The sun is shining. It's a lovely day. You may notice from the condition of the garden and the state of the plants that time has moved on quite substantially since the last time I've made any progress or posted on this pond. And we are now in fact in January, so it's been some time since I've last done anything on the pond. This time of year I would normally be hibernating at home and not doing too much, but I would like to make most of the good weather at the moment and try to make a bit more progress on the pond. I've done a few little bits and pieces here and there since the last time I posted anything, and it's been little bits that I've not really documented. To be honest, getting the camera out does slow me down a little bit, and when I'm just trying to scrabble around for a few hours here and there to make progress, getting the camera out to document it doesn't always work very well. But I do now have officially a pond. It's filled with water. The filtration system, the Filtermatic, is up and running. All the electrics have been installed and are in place, running the Awaza Wi-Fi enabled electric so that I can control everything via apps on my iPad or my iPhone. I've got some lighting rigged up in the pond, albeit just dropped in there, but they are being controlled via a timer on the Awaza electric, so in the evening they come on. And it's interesting to see it developing. You know, I do have something now of a bit of interest. But the pond itself hasn't cleared completely, and that's because there's a lot of lime and debris and dust still in the water which the filtration system isn't going to polish and take out. So I'm at the stage now where I want to drain the pond, get rid of all of this mucky water, refill it with fresh, and in the process I'm going to just give a stonework another jet wash inside. And this is a good opportunity for me to now add the shingle and the gravel, the substrate that I'm going to add to the base of the pond. That's going to conceal all the liner and fill up all the planting zones. And I also want to mount the lights on a proper bracket positioned on the sides of the pond so that they can then be articulated and angled and moved to illuminate certain features of the pond that I choose. So I'm going to drain the pond down, give it a good clean, add the gravel, and then document fixing the lights in place. So I've just emptied and drained the pond, given it a good clean and a jet wash. I've had some offcuts of pond liner, which I've trimmed to fit all of these various different sort of cavities and voids, so that when I put the gravel down, I'm protecting the main pond liner beneath. Now this is a good opportunity to go through a few bits and pieces that I may have missed in some of my previous videos. So the pumps obviously have been installed. One pump is to provide what will be the 2 stainless steel water blades over here, and then the second pump positioned over there is opposite the discharge, the outflow from the filtration system, so that we've got good circulation for the whole pond. All of the pipe work is routed through the stonework. We've got conduits here in place for electrical cables, flex from the pump and for the lights. We've got an overflow system which has been put in through the pond liner via a liner transition or a union. Now I'm aiming to discharge this off into a convenient drain which is close by, but in the few weeks I've had the pond filled up, this is just discharging off into, well, below ground level currently, acting as a soakaway, and it's been very effective. The pond hasn't filled up beyond the overflow, so I may well leave it like that just as a soakaway for the time being, rather than joining it onto the drainage system. And if needs be, I've always got that in place that I can extend that via the pipework. The other side of the pond is a mirror image, again pumps, conduit, lighting, etc. So for now, I'm going to fill this up with gravel, give it a good clean. The gravel itself is going to be very dusty. I'm just using a standard 10mm shingle, nothing fancy. Underwater, it's going to look nice to conceal that pond liner, and it's going to act as a really, really good growing medium in the marginal zones for some of the plants at the top here. It's very dusty though. I'll give it a good rinse first. What a difference that makes, adding the gravel to the pond. This is one of my favourite parts when I'm building ponds, that final transition of concealing all of the man-made materials. Obviously in this instance I've still got lots and lots of work to do, all of the walling and the paving behind, but it marks almost an end to building the pond itself, and I can come up above water level now and start the cascades and the walling. Right, this is about take 6. I'm going to try this again because my GoPro and my sound continually keeps failing, which is very frustrating. But it's been a little while since I've done any more progress in the pond. Spring is underway, the sun is shining. I've got no excuse. I need to crack on with this before I start getting busy at work. So today I wanted to start to do the construction of the stepping stone and the front edge paving of the pond. Now I really struggled to try and find a suitable stone for a stepping stone. I wanted to have a circular piece of stone. There's lots and lots of generic sort of prefab concrete stepping stones that you can get. They're quite small, and a cast concrete really doesn't look very nice. I wanted to have a natural piece of stone. So I've opted for cutting my own piece of stone from a 600 by 600 square Indian sandstone piece of paving. I don't normally like to have the smooth cut edge, so I'm going to try and sort of, make a natural ribbon edge myself by knocking it up a little bit. But because this is going to be sat, in the pond, it's not going to be noticeable. In typical Blue Peter fashion, I have created sort of a DIY foundation stone template. This is just a pot which is going to be filled with concrete, turned upside down, set in the pond, and the stepping stone is going to sit on this nicely. It's quite a big barrier in the pond, so I wanted to make sure that livestock and wildlife could get through here. So I've cut a couple of 4-inch holes in the side of this with a 4-inch cutter. I've got an offcut of 4-inch pipe, which is going to fit through the pot like so. And then when I fill this up with concrete, once it's almost set, I'm going to pull this back out, leaving a hole all the way through. And if I struggle to pull the pipe out, I'll just cut it off and it will remain in situ, but it will still allow access for wildlife through that, and probably create a nice little refuge for things in there as well. So I've got my disc cutter out. I'm going to crack on and get this cut, and fingers crossed I'm successful. So here we have the end result. I'm very pleased with that. I was successful. Took about 10 minutes or so to cut that out carefully. But job done. So I need to neaten up some of these edges. I'm actually not too fussed about that smooth cut. It doesn't look too smooth or in your face. And in fact, once it's in the pond, that's really not going to be noticeable at all. So I'm not going to spend too long sort of knocking this around and creating that natural ribbon edge, because I don't really want to risk damaging this. To create this circle, I used the top of my barbecue as a template and drew around that on the stone, and that's worked very well. So the next job is to fill up this pot with some concrete to create the foundation. Despite the sunshine, it's deceptive. It's pretty cold out here. I'll just grab myself a jumper, make myself a cup of tea, cheers, and now I can crack on with making my foundation stone. Now I've filled all the gaps around this 4-inch pipe with a bit of duct tape, and likewise all the holes at the bottom of the pot I've covered over inside and outside with tape. When I fill this up with concrete, it's going to be quite a liquid runny sort of mix, and I don't want to lose any of that coming through the holes and make a mess. So I'm going to mix this by hand. Again, because it's going to be a very watery mix, it won't take very long. I'm going to be using some ballast, obviously just a sharp sand and gravel mix, and some rapid set cement, which I have got, because I'm impatient and I want this to be relatively solid later on this afternoon. There we go, nice. I can start to pour this into here. I'm probably going to want 4 or 5 mixes like that, so I will crack on. I won't bore you with this, but you'll see the end result. Well, it's been a couple of days since I have filled this pot with the rapid concrete. It's gone off, it's nice and solid, and it's now the moment of truth to see if I can get this out of the pot and see if it's in one piece. Now, I've already tried off camera to turn this upside down and just sort of jiggle it off like a sandcastle. Of course, it wasn't that easy. So I've actually just run down the sides of the pot on both sides with a disc cutter and split the pot, split the mould, so I can try and take it off this way. So let's see if I can get it out. No smirking. In one piece. Bloody heavy. It is to be expected, I suppose. Does not want to come away easily though. Okay, very nearly there. I think just a little bit more cutting on the top and that'll come off nicely. Let's give that a go. Success! I managed to cut this off. Wasn't quite as easy as expected, but still, that's come off. This is in one piece, which is fantastic. Now obviously this is going to be concealed underwater. It's going to have the stepping stone sat on top, so this doesn't have to look pretty. It's going to end up getting covered in algae and you know, sort of a natural underwater patina of growth. Oh, it's solid and heavy enough that that is going to form, I think, a suitable foundation for the stepping stone, particularly once it's cemented on top of the pond liner. And bear in mind that the pond liner was sat on top of a nice concrete foundation already. I suspect it's probably a little bit too tall and will end up sticking up above the level of the pond currently, so I'll end up chopping this down slightly. I could have chopped the pot down, but I was concerned I wasn't going to get a nice smooth edge on the pot. It's easier for me to cut this off with the big disc cutter and kind of smooth it off if needs be. Such a beautiful morning again, which is lovely. But here you can see I've got my Indian sandstone edging squares, just currently dry laid all around the side of the pond here. And these are going to have to be cut now so that I can try and create a slightly more natural curve. and so that I've got a even gap pointing joint between each slab. So I'll end up cutting a bit of each stone so that the front face is slightly narrower than the back, kind of like a, you know, a cheese wedge or a slice, and that's going to work its way around. I've already got a concrete foundation which I'd poured previously beneath these, on which this is going to sit. As you can see, there's probably a little bit more progress in the pond than I'd shown previously, and in fact you may even notice we've got a fish in the pond. This is Casper the goldfish, as my kids have named him. He was rescued from one of my customers' ponds who didn't want him anymore. It's not ideal putting him in here now, but he's fine. He's been quite happy in here, or she, I should probably say. I think it's a female. I'm going to pose a few issues when I'm laying the paving stones. You've got to be very careful not to put any cement into the water, which inadvertently is going to happen. And likewise, when I'm building up the walling and the rest of the patio around here, there's going to be a certain amount of slop falling in the pond, which is going to alter the pH and cause conditions that are not ideal for fish. So I may well have to remove her and put her into a holding tank separately whilst I continue. The stepping stone will end up sitting on that central portion over here, but currently I'm just using this old rusty ramp of mine as a walkway across. All the lighting's rigged up, runs in the evening, looks very nice, the water's clearing. And there's the filtration system up and running. Later on, obviously this is going to be concealed partly behind the walling, which is going to be raised up to about here, but also there'll be plants and various things concealed around that. But it's nice to see a pond. This video seems to be turning more into a weather report than a pond construction build. I always seem to talk about it, and today it's not very nice. It's got a bit cold again, and I'm sort of fighting showers. It's just starting to sprinkle. But a couple of weeks since, again, my last post, and in that time I've made good use of edging the front section of the pond. So all of the Indian sandstone coping has been put down and is ready to point. I had planned on pointing it today, but the weather's put an end to that. So instead, I'm going to dig out this central portion here, get rid of 4 inches or so of the topsoil so that I can then lay down a load of MOT, scalpings, get them whackered down in place to provide a good foundation for the paving that will stand on top of this. The pond has cleared beautifully. Casper the friendly goldfish, who was a rescue that I put in a few weeks ago, who really is a bit of a pain. It's not a great time to have a fish in the pond, and I had to be ultra careful when I was laying all of the edging coping stones not to drop any cement into the pond, because the lime content and the sort of corrosive chemicals from the cement wouldn't do the fish any good at all. But he's fared okay, he's a tough cookie. Looking a little bit lonely in here on his own, so I'm sure he'll be looking forward to a few additions later on. But yeah, it's looking nice. Over the weekend, my kids and I potted on some water lilies, and we've got a couple of baskets of lily down in here, which in a few weeks will break the surface, provide a little bit of cover for Casper the goldfish here. So it's all coming on in leaps and bounds. So I need to crack on, get active, get warm in this cold weather, and start digging this horrible, yucky, clayey soil which has been tamped on and walked on ever since the beginning of this project, so it's not going to be very nice stuff to dig out.